I think I'm going to officially start the podcast now.
Crack on.
Dave.
Yeah.
So we've had the preamble.
Yeah.
So,
Otherwise we'll be here 3 hours.
They charge by the hour, these guys. But welcome back.
Right,
Dave,
thanks very
to
much,
another,
James.
episode of In The Know. It's great to see you again in the flesh. I really enjoyed our first conversation. It's great that we can do part 2, the sequel that probably no one thought there was ever going to be a sequel.
Yeah.
I think today we've agreed on talking about not SJP, but we're going to be talking more about the blueprint of building a successful business.
Yeah.
For which we talked about your days at Centurion. So when we're talking about a successful business, we're talking about a thriving profession. We're talking about fee structures. We're talking about new entrants. We're talking about professional connections. So we're going to try and get your secret sauce, your blueprint, how you did that. We are going to touch on SJP, and I'm sure the conversation will ebb and flow as it normally does. But the first question I've got is slightly different. Since I've last seen you, we've got a new government, got a Labour government, Dave.
Yeah.
Right. Very quickly on that, what's your thoughts? Are you expecting any major changes from a business perspective, a tax perspective? What's your gut feeling about this new government coming in?
I suppose I haven't really thought about that too much because I've retired. But I'm actually quite encouraged, to be quite fair. What I am more encouraged about than anything is I think this government's come in and started acting in quite a mature way straight away. And okay, they've got a new mandate, they've got a very strong mandate, so they can behave like grown-ups, because I think my big problem with the last government, and particularly speaking as a business owner and a professional who was talking to clients, was the really, I suppose, largely childish behaviour, the sort of point scoring, the public bickering amongst the Conservative Party members, and particularly the higher up, more senior members of it, and the general lack of stability that really it caused. I think it's very difficult. We're talking a bit about business planning today. Hugely difficult for any business to plan in that sort of environment. So I suppose I am much encouraged, because at least the bickering seems to have stopped, and at least it's not in the headlines. And I think, I don't know Keir Starmer at all well, but I think he's set out with a fairly mature attitude so far. I think he's got his people together. I think he's allocated the jobs fairly well, and I'm pretty much encouraged. I think probably he might benefit economically, because I do think the economy is beginning to turn. I don't think the government can take too much credit for that, or the previous government can take too much credit for that. I think it's much more down to the Bank of England. And I think improvement was inevitable, actually. But I think hopefully perhaps the economy beginning to come together a bit, and the politicians behaving like grown-ups. Well, yeah.
Bit more maturity.
I think the future's better than the past has been.
Well, let's hope so anyway.
Yeah.
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
Can't get any worse. Well,
No.
it can, but hopefully
Well,
not.
it can, but it's going to have to go some to get worse than the last few years, really, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is.
So, and I've bought my new motorhome now, James.
Oh,
as
so it'll
well.
be off anyway. So you're all right, Jack. You paid into the system.
That's the benefit of being retired, James, I suppose, to be honest.
Don't
but
worry.
yes.
We'll
Yeah.
keep the lights on. All right. Well, thanks for that. So let's just briefly recap on SJP, and then we can box that off and talk about your secret sauce and the blueprint. So the reflection piece, we had a good conversation about SJP. I'm quite happy to tell you the feedback that I got.
Yeah, I'd like to know.
And I'm happy to tell you. But from your perspective, with regards to the conversation that we had, what was the feedback that you received?
But by and large, it was very good, actually. I think people hopefully now realise that this is not a rant, this is not a vendetta. All I am legitimately trying to do is inform people about what I perceive to be the two sides of the financial advice fence, the sort of the fence, the professional side of the fence, and what I describe as the industrial side of the fence. And particularly what I'm quite keen to get across is the conflicts of interest that exist in large swathes of the financial advice sector. not just to inform consumers, but hopefully also to get advisors, and particularly new entrants and younger advisors who will drive the future of the profession, thinking about those conflicts of interest and the implications of trying to provide professional advice when you're in that sort of situation. So the feedback I got was good. I think I had 3 people who are connected to SJP come back and say, I'm still spouting the usual drivel. That's water off a duck's back to me. I don't expect them to agree with me. It's not their opinion really that matters to me. It's more the opinion of the consumer and particularly the younger and newer advisor. So,
did you get people from the younger generation?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
And that was probably the most heartening thing, actually, because that is one group I am trying to get thinking in the same way as I said to you that my mentor got me thinking about how to do this the right way. And I'm much heartened about that. And I also got a lot of feedback from people who are looking or potentially looking at financial advice as a second career. And the feedback there was very good as well. And I think hopefully I've sort of I've given them some more information that perhaps they didn't have. I've got them thinking about how they'd like to develop their careers. But the challenge now is actually finding them the opportunities to do it.
That's a big issue, that.
And that's a huge issue. And that, again, is another part of the mission, I suppose, that I'm on. That I do want to try and create more opportunities. And what's also been interesting is I had a contact literally probably 3 days ago on LinkedIn from a firm which is based down in Hampshire saying they are now looking at recruiting some trainees. So, the momentum's building, and I think hopefully what we're going to cover today will help keep it rolling along.
Okay. From my perspective, the feedback was generally positive from people that I know, who obviously will tell you the truth anyway, and then people that I don't know that contacted me, and what they said, it was a very fair and balanced conversation, and that was good because we didn't want it to be ranty.
No,
it was a case of giving you a platform to actually express your opinion in more than just a keyboard style. So generally, the feedback was very positive. I didn't really get any negative feedback, although having said that, I did speak to a gentleman yesterday because he wrote a very long email to me, so I thought I'll pick up the phone. And he is an SJP member, and obviously I won't mention his name. And the feedback I normally get is most people say Dave is good value, Dave makes a lot of good points. And that's normally the start of most of the correspondence that I receive.
And then there's a but.
For this one, there's a but. Because I think he was saying there is some technical inaccuracies with regards to what you're saying about the advice, because they can go, not every piece of advice is through St James's Place. They do advice outside of that. And I won't get into that because I think that's for them to have that conversation with you. So there was a little bit of a technical inaccuracy, but also from this person's perspective, I think he was talking about 2 things. The optics, how does this look when people, maybe the younger generation are looking, or trainees looking to get into it, and they see this type of, in some ways, almost like a toxic debate that could be considered that. And the second thing he was talking about was he had worked for an IFA business.
Yeah.
And he has seen both sides of the fence, that you say. And his opinion, having worked for an IFA business, that he felt that the advice, the compliance, the checking, the professionalism was far greater than what he'd experienced in a traditional IFA environment. So those were the points that he made to me, which I thought were quite interesting to balance out the conversation we had.
I think they're interesting points. I mean, I think as I would, my response to the first one, I'm not out to create any toxicity. Okay. What I am out to do is give people full and proper information as far as I can about the implications of taking advice from someone who is first and foremost representing a product manufacturer, an investment manager, a manufacturer who gets paid by product charges rather than for giving advice, and the conflicts of interest that result. I am not saying, and I have never said that St James's Place is wrong. What I am saying is that St James's Place and its sales force masquerades as something that it isn't. It is a product manufacturer. It is not what I would call a financial advisor. We'll perhaps talk a little bit about what I define as a professional advisor. So I'm not out to create toxicity, but what I am out to do is inform. And the feedback I get is that when people go and talk to St James's Place, new entrants potentially coming in, they don't get that full picture. They hear what St James's Place want to tell them. And what I do know is that people have been asking more questions when they've gone to speak to the St James's Place Academy. And I also know that quite a lot of people haven't joined it as a result of perhaps some of the thought process I've tried to instill.
Have they joined the industry, do you know, or have they just decided not to join?
No, I think all of the ones who have joined have come in either through one of the other two academies,
Okay.
The two big ones. A couple have come in through the Ascot Lloyd Academy. And I know, I think I've helped about a dozen find trainee roles in what I would call proper professional independent firms. So, I don't want to be toxic about this. Financial advice is a great career. And as I said to you in my last session, I started on that side of the fence. I just did it with my eyes fully opened. And I did it with the full knowledge that I was compromising my principles, and I had to do that. There was no other alternative. And I used that initial period simply as a route to an end, which was to be able to get over to the professional side of the fence. And that is absolutely fine. People join the SJP Academy. It does get people through the qualifications. I dispute that it turns them into financial advisors because I don't think it does. But it gets them to base one.
I think that's the contentious point, isn't it, when you're saying it doesn't turn them into financial advisors, because clearly they take the same level of qualifications, so they can meet a client, they can go through the same issues that the client may have, the goals that the client wishes to achieve. So it's almost like it's semantics in some way, because they still provide financial advice to clients, okay, within that model, but it's still financial advice.
Yeah, but we are talking about St James's Place again, aren't we? And I don't really want to talk about St James's Place. I want to talk about more interesting things. But my point, James, is fundamentally it is a product manufacturer. Yeah. Anyone that provides advice through St James's Place is conflicted, because St James's Place controls their ability to earn a living. If they don't sell St James's Place products or other products on which St James's Place earns an income, then they are of no use to St James's Place. So they're in this position of conflict. They have to recommend St James's Place products. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure St James's Place will cease authorising them. That is not in my philosophy giving financial advice. That is recommending a product, and the advice is limited to the extent it needs to be to justify the recommendation of the product. What I say about a financial advisor is they come at it from a totally different perspective, like an accountant or a lawyer would. They start by looking at the client's situation. They understand that situation, they understand the client's needs and objectives, and then what they do is they formulate advice to either achieve those objectives or address those concerns, and that's what they do, and that's what they get paid for. It's just a different way of looking at things, but that to me is proper professional financial advice. And the other definition of professional, in my view, is you've got to do it without conflict of interest. You only act for your client. You only get paid by your client. And you're very explicit and transparent about your fee structure. So that's my view of a financial advisor. I just think that if you are first and foremost representing a product manufacturer, you don't qualify as a financial advisor. You are, in my eyes anyway, a technically qualified salesperson. And I also think there's a huge amount more to being a professional than qualifications. And I think the case for making that argument has increased quite dramatically over the last few days, now that the CII has effectively started to say it's going to give away the chartered qualification without people having to pass the level 6 exams to do it. You know, that's watering down professionalism.
Just on that, why? Yeah, I've only seen.
Well,
do we know why? What's behind the? What do you think's behind?
What do I? Yeah. I mean, you expect
opinion?
Me to have an opinion.
Let me push
on
your
this.
button. Go on.
My opinion on this is, I can only think that the CII wants to create more chartered financial planners. You know, maybe there aren't enough around in the CII's eyes, but I'm very cynical about this because you pay more as a membership fee to be a chartered financial planner, etc. I suspect pretty much everything the CII does now is all about raising fees, making money. You know, devaluing a qualification certainly doesn't help the cause of professional financial advice, and it's a real kick in the teeth for anyone who's actually put themselves through that qualification.
Have they publicly stated why they're doing it?
I don't think they have. I mean, I'm not close enough to the CII.
Well, you're retired now anyway.
I am retired, but I wasn't particularly a fan of the PFS for quite a long time. I suppose, you know, I was a CISI member as well. I don't know the London Institute of Banking and Finance at all well. But I haven't been a fan of the CII ever since, you know, all the malarkey over the financial position of the institute itself and its basic takeover of the PFS. You know, what I strongly believe is that professional financial advisors need and deserve their own professional body. I don't think financial advice should be a subset of either insurance, in the case of the CII, or investment in the case of the CISI. I think there is a real need for a professional financial planning to have its own body and its own conflict-free qualification awarding body.
Are there any alternatives out there? Because I know
not really.
The CI are the main one.
The CII is the big one. Well, the biggest one, as I understand it. But what I think is that the professional body should actually be strengthening the qualification, not demeaning it. And my personal view of chartered status is I think it should require a properly articled training regime, like the one I went through as a chartered accountant. You know, 3 years near enough close supervision under the close control and supervision of a very experienced partner in the firm who took personal responsibility for my supervision, development, my knowledge building, my competence, my sort of skills at dealing with clients. You know, I was very closely supervised and monitored, but also importantly mentored. And he then signed me off after 3 years, and it was a real sense of achievement. You know, I'd passed the exams probably 18 months before I got signed off because I had a degree in the subject as well, so I didn't have to do all of the exams. But, you know, that's what we should be doing. We shouldn't just be making it easy to be a chartered financial planner, because if we do that, what's the point in having a chartered financial planner designation? And, you know, ultimately the consumer will work out that it's not what it's cracked up to be. So I'm really cross about that, even though I'm no longer practising and a member of the CII. And I do know an awful lot of chartered financial planners who are very, very displeased about it.
Well, watch this space. I'll get them on to discuss it, because
it's
only just come out that.
It has, and it's, you know, hugely important. So I forgot what your second point was. The first thing was the toxicity thing, and I'm hoping that, you know.
Yeah, and I think this.
I hope we've addressed that. But what was his other point?
The second point is he has worked on both sides of the fence, and he has seen, you know, some behaviours unbecoming of an independent firm whilst working for an independent. And his experience working with St James's Place is the level of scrutiny, the compliance, the general sort of care and attention and the disclosure that they do provide to clients, which he says, is exceptional. The final point he would say on that is, I think there's also a wind of change coming through the business. And hopefully that will be a positive change, because I think that's what really you're advocating for. You're not advocating for the death of a business. You're saying if it can change something, then all better
I've always
for the
said
consumer.
it's got the potential to be the biggest and possibly the best financial advisor in the land. It's a way away. It'll take a massive cultural shift, but it's certainly got the potential. But I think the other point, this is often lost on people who are operating in a restricted environment. No way would I ever claim that independent financial advisors all act professionally. And I've clearly said on several occasions, the expert witness work I've done, historically, yes, probably the biggest and most substantial, well, definitely the biggest and most substantial amount of money I ever recovered for a client on that front was from a restricted advisor. But certainly the vast majority of the cases I was involved in were against independent financial advisors. My point there is, I think the definition of independent is long overdue an overhaul. The FCA's definition of independence is totally nonsensical, as we said last time. No one is a whole of market advisor anymore. It's practically impossible to be that. Particularly, it is absolutely impossible to be it cost effectively. You'd only be able to deal with half a dozen clients a year, probably. If you had to be completely whole of market, you can't do it. No. And I also know that independent financial advisors come in a real spectrum. Some are very definitely very professional, others are not so, and I've certainly bumped into those in my time. I don't claim that independent financial advisor status is any sort of panacea or definer of professionalism. It really isn't. I've got a very clear idea of what I think a professional financial advisor is, and it really doesn't have a huge amount to do with the regulatory status of the people involved. So yeah, I say this all the time to St James's Place people and other restricted advisors. I'm not particularly fighting the corner of independence because, for a start, I think the definition of independence is utter nonsense.
I think it's nonsense, but and there's conflict everywhere.
Well, I would argue you can operate as a professional financial advisor without conflict, and it all literally comes down to how you do the work. And it also comes down to how you quote your fees. I strongly believe that my firm was totally conflict-free, and I specifically, with my colleagues, designed a fee structure to ensure that.
Well, let's get on to that then, because I think we can close the SJP chapter until about 11 o'clock tonight when you open it again on LinkedIn. But I think you've given your views, you've given your opinion, and people can agree or disagree. For the record, I think I understand why you do it. I always question some of the tactics that you do and the optics that it can give off, but I understand that belief system. I get it. So I think it's watch this space, I think, with St James's Place and other models and see how they adapt, because, the advice profession is changing. So we'll wait and see. So today I want to get into your secret sauce, Dave, because you mentioned to me the last time we had a conversation that your happiest time was when you're working at Centurion and you built a successful business which ultimately ended up in an MBO. And I know of many advisors now who are considering their options.
Right.
So I want to tap into your knowledge, because when we're going to be talking about fee structures and new entrants, etc., it's all based on the strength of a business. You can't do that unless you've got a strong, profitable business. So let's delve into that. And probably the first question is, how do you go about, in your opinion, building a successful independent firm? What are the main blocks to do?
I think probably the starting point is you've got to want to build a firm. I think too many financial advisors take the view that this is all about me. I'm going to be a one-person band. And I think some of that goes back historically to the way that financial advisors have been trained. There's too much of this sort of you're out there, you are responsible for generating your own fees. You will get paid according to the amount of fees that you generate. If you don't generate any fees, you won't get paid, and etc. There's not enough support and mentoring in the early days. And what that instills in an awful lot of people is this sort of, I'm out for myself here. No one's going to help me. I'm going to have to plough my own course, and it's me on my own. And so I think the starting point is you've got to want to create a firm. And I do harp on about my background as an accountant, but let's just have a look at the way accountants and solicitors operate for a moment. In those sectors, there are very, very few very small firms. There are almost no sole practitioners around anymore in the legal and accountancy space. There are also very few very large firms. There are some enormous global firms, but there are relatively few of them. Most lawyers and accountants operate in this space of probably, 5 to 20 partners. And they build firms like that. If you look at financial advice, it's totally the other way around. Most financial advisors either work on a self-employed basis within a very large organisation, or the next biggest demographic, I think, is people operating on their own in one or two person bands. Centurion, we built to 12 advisors, and I was told we were in the top 10% in the country in terms of advisor numbers.
Size, yeah.
And that was 12 advisors. We had 4 sort of advisor directors, if you like. So why do lawyers and accountants do that? Well, the first thing is they realise that they can't be all things to all people. Clients want an all-round general service. Clients have got their own different needs, objectives and situations, and they want to deal with specialists. Lawyers and accountants recognise that you can't be really a general practitioner at a high enough level. There's a basic level of financial advice. Maybe if you're sort of, tucking away £500 a month or something like that, that's pretty basic level financial advice. But as things get more complicated and as your situations change, your situation as a client will become far more complex. And it is impossible for anyone these days to hold all of the technical knowledge that you need in your head. And what does frustrate me sometimes is I see a number of financial advisors sort of saying, well, we can be all things to all people. And particularly they talk about intergenerational planning. Well, I used to specialise in later life. I used to specialise in situations where people had lost capacity or were losing capacity. I used to deal with a lot of cases where people had been really catastrophically injured, where children with special needs had been born, where a relationship had broken down. Well, all of those scenarios have their own specialist or need, really, for specialist advice. What I would also argue is it takes a very different set of soft skills to advise somebody in later life compared to someone who is perhaps one of their grandchildren. It takes a very different set of soft skills to advise a business owner, particularly one who, to use a fairly crude term, has got a fairly hard-arsed attitude. I spent the first 15 years of my financial advice career dealing with such business owners and with accountants. The last 20 dealing with solicitors and people who were in all sorts of different sort of vulnerable circumstances. My soft skills had to change dramatically. If I, in the latter stages of my career, had tried to talk to quite a dynamic, hard-nosed, determined, driven business person, they'd have thought they were talking to some sort of wet lettuce or something.
Because you changed.
I had changed all of my soft skills. Conversely, some of the people that I worked with during my career would find it hugely difficult to connect to either somebody in later life, or particularly a widow who'd just lost a husband, a parent who just had a child with special needs, a wife whose husband had just suffered a serious personal injury, or a husband or wife who's just ended a really quite lengthy marriage. Different skills. You can't be a general practitioner, not in my book.
I'll raise a challenge there, because I wouldn't say I'm hard nosed, but I certainly run a business, and we do all right. But I wouldn't say that your skill set is quite soft and flaccid when I'm talking to you. We get on a level, and I think your experience. So I wouldn't look at you and thinking, I'm looking to grow, I'm looking to build, I'm looking for PE and all of that, and think, there's Dave, and he's just he's into the soft stuff. I would, from your the way you talk to me, I think you could span both quite easily still.
Well, maybe I could. Maybe I
impression.
could, soft skills wise, but certainly, I didn't give technical pensions advice for the last 15 years of my career. I never touched pensions, not even people accumulating in pensions. I know absolutely nothing at all about a SAS. The colleagues I used to work with as a Centurion used to take the mickey out of me. Every year we used to go through a sort of, let's say it was a very simple knowledge test, just really to tick boxes. And the reason why we had to do a broad range of those tests was because the FCA insists that everybody passes a sort of knowledge test in pensions every year. Well, there used to be a sweepstake on how badly I do on the pensions test.
All right.
And it was pointless. I was never going to give pensions advice. If somebody walked into my firm, or if
That's
somebody
bullying,
approached
Dave.
me,
That's bullying, I'm sure.
Well, bullying in the workplace, absolutely. But highly amusing, and obviously the pension techies that we had I knew absolutely nothing about that as a subject. So, this is my point. I think if one of the reasons lawyers and accountants build firms is because they realise they need to specialise themselves. And then what they need to do is collaborate with other people who specialise in other fields of advice that complement their own. And so between them, they can be a very good quality general practice. And that's one of the things that we built at Centurion. We very often used to have 2 or 3 people collaborating on a client. I used to collaborate with Dan, the divorce specialist. If a child with special needs or an injury was involved, I would bring him in if one of our personal injury clients was going through a rocky period with a relationship or a marriage. It's just common sense to me. That was how I grew up in accountancy. We used to collaborate with lawyers. If you go into a law firm to talk about buying a property, you will go and speak to the property department. If you want to talk about contracts of employment, you'll go and talk to a contract specialist.
It makes sense.
Absolutely it does.
We had an accountant, and I deal with the account manager who does the generic, how you're getting on. Then you do the management accounts, you speak to those people. Then you do your payroll and you speak to those people. So I understand. So you advocate for people to have a specialist knowledge, skill sets, emotional intelligence to deal with the different aspects of a client.
Yeah. And I think it also, James, makes commercial sense because, I think I had a quite a successful career in financial advice by anyone's measure, no matter how you define it. What I do believe, the secret of my success, or a large part of the secret of my success, was I did specialise in certain areas of advice. And the other thing I specialised in was working with professional connections. As I say, accountants for 15 years and lawyers for the last 20. Now, accountants, yes, probably are looking for more general practitioners. They like the cash flow modelling. You've obviously got to have good pensions advice. You probably need to know about tax-efficient investments, profit extraction. You need to know about various different insurance schemes that are attractive to business owners and all that kind of stuff. That's what accountants want. Lawyers really want specialists. And the reason why lawyers specialise is that that's what their training is all about. legal training or training as a solicitor, you will pass a set of exams which will cover all areas of law. But once you begin your practical training, you will specialise and you will go through various seats, as they're known, in different departments of the firm. And then once you qualify, you and your employer will decide which area of law you are going to specialise in. And what you will then do is you will focus on that specialist area of law. And lawyers, people used to tell me all the time, it's impossible to get referrals from lawyers. It's impossible to collaborate with them. Well, I've proved that it isn't. We had probably 15, 20 relationships with law firms. We had a number of formal joint ventures. Those all came about because one of the things we realised was that we need to specialise in the same way that lawyers do. And if a family lawyer wanted to talk to someone about Form A, for example, which is part of the documentation you go through in a divorce proceeding, be no good talking to me. Go and talk to one of our divorce specialists. On the other hand, if they wanted to talk about constructing and settling a personal injury award, then yes, absolutely, talk to me or one of the other 2 or 3 that specialise in that sort of area. That's one of the big secrets of success in professional connections. Lawyers and accountants look for very different things. And I do think one of the reasons why a lot of financial advisors find it difficult to work and collaborate, and if you like to put it crudely, generate referrals from the legal profession, is because they claim to be general practitioners and the legal profession just doesn't believe that you can be. So that was one reason for building a firm. But the other reason is just commercial common sense. I did build a firm literally from scratch with no clients, as I told you last time. After, that was one of the sort of crisis events, if you like, in my career. It was very hard work. It was hugely risky. It wasn't a great deal of fun. When I set about with Stuart building Centurion, both of us decided that on the basis of our probably combined 50, 60 years worth of experience, the best way to do this was collaborate together. And that became far more enjoyable. The crucial point is you have to trust and you have to collaborate with the right people. If you're trying to collaborate with the wrong people, you probably are better going on your own.
Yeah.
But as long as you're collaborating with the right people and you have a trust in those people and a very open relationship with them and nothing's off the table and everyone's happy to discuss everything and reach a common view, it's just far more fun.
Let me just jump in there, Dave, because if I remember in your career, in our last conversation, you talked about you worked with some, the wrong people. You were sort of let down or it didn't work. And you've mentioned the word collaboration already a couple of times and trust. The question I've got is, how do you know when you can trust somebody?
I think if I sort of focus on the example of Stuart and I, we'd got to know each other probably 2.5 years prior to actually getting together as business partners. We met because of a common interest in personal injury work, basically. And we did loosely sort of collaborate together on trying to get an accreditation scheme off the ground for financial advisors who want to specialise in personal injury work, because there isn't one. It's the one big area where the training is absolutely missing. So Stuart and I rather naively tried to have a go at putting one of those together, and it was just too difficult to do, as well as running our own careers, looking after our own clients, etc. So we'd known each other as people for 2.5 years. We had common interests. One of our big common interests was rugby. We both used to play it to quite a reasonable standard. I suppose one test of our relationship was he's a fanatical Bath supporter. I am a Bristol supporter.
Even from Leeds?
I have no choice. I live in Bristol now. Well, I have a choice. It could be Bristol or Bath because I live in the middle. But and actually, I mean, what's even more galling is, there's no rugby league down there.
No, that's true.
But so Stuart and I seriously knew each other as people. We got on well. We were mates. We used to go for a drink occasionally, etc. We thought we get on very well.
Yeah.
Another thing, I suppose, that was perhaps instrumental in our relationship was we had both had previous bad experiences with business partners. And one of the crucial things about building a career is you learn from history. You learn from mistakes. We felt we'd get on very well together, but we'd never worked together. We'd never been sort of inextricably financially interlinked, and that's quite a big step to take. And, trust is what this all comes down to. We trusted each other as people, but we'd never had any experience of working together as business partners. So what we did, and it was partly forced upon me anyway by circumstances, was we had two companies. And my company became an appointed representative of Stuart's. And what we said was, we will run this as a sort of combined firm, but we will keep it separate. We'll have a collective mentality. We'll help each other out. We'll try and build something together, but we will keep it separate in a kind of legal sense, so that if it doesn't work, it's going to be easy enough.
A plan B, just in case.
To take it apart and go our separate ways. That was a good sort of starting point. Because we were now both operating under a Centurion brand, we had two companies, both with Centurion in the company name. We had a common interest, but we built it gradually. And we said we'd give it 1 year to make that decision, and we actually put them together after, I think it was about 9 months. Because we realised that not only did we get on well as mates, we got on very well as business partners. And one other point there, I suppose, James, is that we're different people. We have different skill sets. Stuart is far better at dealing with people than I am. I had a far more technical outlook than Stuart did. But we did get on. And what we obviously realised was that the sum of the parts resulted in a far greater whole. And we complemented each other, and we talked a lot, and we made decisions in common. And when we brought our two firms together, one of the, I suppose, crucial points, one of the really great points was we didn't prat about valuing each other's respective client bases. We just said, we're going to put this together and we're going to split it 50-50. And that's what we did. And when we put it together, one of the other things that we did was develop this rolling 7-year business plan. We had a lot of conversations about, right, what's the end game here?
Why 7 years?
My retirement.
So that was, okay.
Yeah. I have retired earlier than state retirement age for a number of reasons, really. One, I need to focus on my son's care regime. But the other thing I want to do is have this period of time where I try and give something back to what I would call the profession, and particularly repay the help that I was given by my mentor, the late great David Norton. This is partly this is my sort of year of giving back, if you like. So we had a 7-year time horizon, and we started by sort of defining the end goal, which was, well, I'm going to retire at that point in time. You've already made the point. If I'm going to retire from, and another point we made was, and what we want to do is build a firm that's going to sustain itself. We're not doing this so we can build a client base and flog it off to a consolidator. That was another very, very strong.
And you both agreed on that?
Absolutely, we were. Yeah. And because we were also aligned professionally, and we were also both very loyal to our clients and very loyal to our introducers. And in our case, we were also aiming to build a particular kind of firm. We'll talk about, our modus operandi, our process, our fee structure. there wasn't really anything else like it out there. If we had sold it to a consolidator, it would undoubtedly have resulted in really quite significant disruption, not just for the clients, but also for the team that we wanted to build, and also for the professional introducers, which was where we were specifically going to be targeting our referral base. And it was just as a point of pride. And, what I wanted to do was build this, or what Stuart wanted to do was build a specialist vulnerable client firm. And particularly given the nature of that client base, there was no way we were going to throw it to the wolves of a consolidator. So that was another part of the end game. And you made the point already, if we were going to build a firm that was going to sustain me retiring from it, and in due course Stuart retiring, probably, I think, don't quote me on this, but I think he's probably 5 years or so behind me. If we were going to achieve that, we had to build a firm of a certain critical mass. And crucially, if it was going to sustain itself, we had to have that second tier of advisors who were going to come through and take it on. And in our case, because Stuart and I are both particularly disinterested, and also, well, he's not totally incompetent when it comes to IT, but I am. What we also had to do was bring in someone who could deal with all of that. So we had the bones of a business plan, and the starting point of that business plan was, what's the end game? What do we want to achieve? And so what I then did was put together a sort of 7-year plan. Well, I suppose, to be fair, a 5-year plan. Really looking at the following 12 months in detail. Yeah. And we built that firm, that plan on a sort of rolling basis, so that we always were looking 1 year ahead in very detailed fashion. We knew very clearly where we wanted to be in terms of the position on fee income, costs, staffing, all of the infrastructure. We knew where we wanted to be at the end of the year, and we had all sorts of measurable targets involved.
Let me just jump in there, Dave, because I said last time, I'm not a lover of business plans, and I've seen hundreds, and I have done hundreds, and invariably, I'm a believer in them, okay, because you need to plan ahead. You need to have a focus. But invariably, things change. Markets change, personnel changes, attrition rate, whatever. So when you, and we'll talk about your business plan because you kindly shared it anyway, but when you're on a cycle and you're looking ahead in a year, how close did you get to actually achieving the numbers of that business plan in that year? Because invariably things can change. So sometimes you do a business plan and 3 months later you've lost three members of staff and you're like, all right, you've got to redo it. So I'm just thinking in terms of how close did you actually get year on year to the original business plan?
We got closer as we went on, put it that way. And you're absolutely right. A business plan is a framework. It's a path, if you like. There is always going to be stuff that's going to get in the way and take you off that path. But the crucial point is you've got to set a path so that you know where you're going to end up. You've also got to anticipate, I'm going to fall off that path from time to time. But it's crucial that you know when you have. And it's also crucial that you take action to try and get yourself back on it. One of the crucial points, which you've just mentioned, which is really interesting, you said markets. Now, this partly comes back to fee structure. Market movements had literally no impact at all on our business plan. Okay. With the perhaps minor caveat, and it is a minor caveat, that if investment markets are in absolute turmoil, maybe some clients are not as keen to invest capital. Okay, just hold that thought for a minute, because that was an absolutely minor caveat in our case, partly because of the type of client that we were aiming at.
It's vulnerable clients.
Yes.
Predominantly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And well, not just vulnerable clients, professionally introduced clients. Okay. So that's why market movements had no impact at all on our plan. But crucially, our fee structure was all based around fixed fees. And I've shared that fee agreement with you. Our modus operandi that, again, Stuart and I agreed on was that we wanted to remove conflicts of interest. We only wanted to act for our clients. We wanted to give properly competent advice, and that's another point. We wanted to build our firm so that we could give properly competent advice. Stuart isn't a technical pension specialist either. That was a hole we needed to fill. So our fee structure was all based around offering any client a meeting free of charge. And the aim of that meeting was for us to find out about the client's situation, objectives, and probably concerns. And for us to work out what work was going to be involved in producing a piece of advice that would either help them achieve the objectives or address the concerns or whatever it was they wanted to achieve. The other aim of that initial meeting was for us to present ourselves, our firm, our ethics, our modus operandi, our expertise, whatever you wanted to present to the client, and hopefully to gain the client's trust. Now, that was the bit that we were doing free of charge. And what we'd then do is come away from that meeting and we would draft a scope of work in the form that I've shared with you. And because I've been time recording for quite a long time prior to this, Stuart had no time recording experience, but I had a lot. We also agreed that what we wanted to try and do was build our fees on the basis of the time it was going to take us to complete the job. And so we agreed on that mentality and that fee structure. So all of our fees were fixed. And people have said to me, actually, over the course of the last month since we had our first chat, James, by fixed fees, do I mean all fees were fixed? And my answer to that is yes. You know, that ongoing fees, the aim was to fix those as well. Historically, we had some clients who were on percentage-based ongoing fees because it was just old historic stuff. But we set out that one of our other objectives was to get everybody onto a fixed pound amount going forwards.
But do you change it for inflation? And
well, yeah. When I say fix, what I say is an agreed amount.
Yeah.
But the objective then was to quote the fee, to agree the fee with the client, and then as part of the review process, what we would look at is the amount of time we'd actually spent on the client over the year compared to the fee that we'd charged them. And we were in control of that decision as to whether or not we felt we needed to change the fee. And we did change some fees downwards, quite frankly. But that took a process of years to get to because we had a business to run in the meantime. But that was one of the objectives for this 7-year period: get the clients onto fixed fees.
Fixed fees, yeah.
But the beauty of that was that every 1st of January, when we fell out of bed at the beginning of a new year, we pretty much knew what our recurring fee base was going to be for the following year. And that was our most important business income, obviously. And one of the crucial parts of the plan was to build that recurring fee base. Knowing that we had that amount of money coming through the bank and knowing which month it was going to be coming through the bank, it then enabled me to plan the cash flow. And we knew what the overhead costs were going to be because the overheads are the easy bit. The only bit that is in the lap of the gods is, frankly, the FCA fees, the FCA levy, and the PI insurance.
Yeah, you've got insurance.
Everything,
they
everything
fluctuate.
else is controllable pretty much. And probably everything else is pretty immaterial, apart from perhaps IT. So we had very firm control over the costs, and we knew what staff we needed, and we knew what staff we were missing. And as I say, the two crucial appointments, apart from back office support, were Steve and Chris. Steve in charge of process, back office, IT, infrastructure. Chris basically running or coming in to succeed me in our crucial joint venture, the big one that we had down in Devon and Cornwall. We needed someone to come in and run that in the same way I'd run it, to also big up our technical competence, particularly on pensions matters. Chris is very well qualified in all sorts of fields, but amongst other things, he's a pension specialist. So those were perhaps the first two important recruits. And what we did with them, I think, as I said to you last time, we brought them in on some really quite significant salaries with a view, if this works out, in the same way as Stuart and I had said, is if we'll give it 12 months, we said to them, if it works out in 12 months' time, we're going to bin those salaries, we're going to bring you into equity. And it came down to trust. They had to trust us.
Yeah.
We trusted them. Nobody knew each other prior to them coming in, really. I knew Chris a bit, but not as well as I do now. But we had a framework. That's the crucial point. Set a framework, set something that's measurable, keep it under review, keep talking to each other, build your relationship, and cover as much of the bases as you can before you take the plunge of sort of hooking yourselves up inextricably. That works extremely well for Stuart and I. It works extremely well for Stuart, Chris, Steve and I.
Yeah.
And as we built that, so the sort of missing line in our business plan was the new business income. And the one crucial point that I wanted to get to as soon as we could was to cover the increasing staff cost and, to some extent, the increasing overhead, because we now had 2 offices as well. I wanted to cover that with recurring income. And I wanted to really free myself up to go out and take responsibility for the new business line. Now, one of the other reasons for building a firm is that you are able to put people in different roles that suit them. One of the big issues I think exists in most financial advisor firms is that all advisors are given the responsibility of going out and finding their own new clients. And we're all different, aren't we? Some people love developing new clients. Other people are not either as in love with it, or is not as good at it, or is not as confident enough to be able to do it, etc. And frankly, not experienced enough to be able to do it.
Yeah.
It's a hugely different thing if an advisor who's just got his exam passes and he's had about 3 or 4 months training. Very difficult for them to go out and start convincing clients they are the financial advisor to deal with. Compare that to an old fart like me who's been doing it for 30 years. It becomes second nature by then. If you're not oozing confidence to a client after 30 years, you'll never be doing it.
And you've also got experience as well, Dave.
You have.
And breeds that confidence.
Yeah. So by building the firm, what we were also able to do by bringing in other people was we were able to put people in the right sort of role.
How come you got the business development challenge? Because you said you're more the technical guy.
Well, Chris I was compared to Stuart.
Yeah.
And I like to think I was.
Yeah.
I was a chartered accountant. I was a STEP member. I was SOLA accredited. I was very definitely, I like to think, on top of my game technically in my specialist areas. But Chris is equally, if not more so. Well, probably better, actually, technically. A, his brain's younger and more nimble, and B, he's a pensions specialist. As I say, I knew nothing at all about pensions. But what we also agreed, Stuart was good at business development. Stuart ran our brought in and developed our second largest lawyer connection. But what we felt was that I suppose partly because I had this chartered accountant mentality in my first career and experience of working within other professional practices, And because I also had the technical ability very definitely to talk to private client lawyers, to corporate protection lawyers, to personal injury lawyers, we felt it would be best if I went out and did the business development. So one of the next recruits that we brought in was a very, very experienced chartered financial planner who had been good at business development, but didn't particularly want that role anymore.
What do you mean by business development? Because
attracting new clients broadly, and bringing them
attracting
in.
new clients.
New clients, yeah.
Would it also focus on your existing connections? So you do your land and expand as well. So it's generating new business either from new clients or existing connections, which you can.
New or existing connections or new connections, but also bringing in new clients from and engaging with new clients.
And did you have a process for this? Because this is where I always think business development. Some people look at it, and it's like, today I'm going to do some business development. So what does that actually mean? What is your process? And to me, business development is a term, and underneath it, there's layers to it. You've got your marketing, you've got your advertising, you've got your round tables, whatever it is. There's loads of things. So from your perspective, did you follow a process to generate those new business from new connections?
Yes. Yeah, and
what's the secret sauce then on that one?
Okay, no advertising really.
Okay.
No advertising and no social media really either. The first point, I was just going to say, one of our other crucial recruits was to bring in a very experienced guy who was very, very good at looking after clients. And so what that enabled me to do was start handing out clients. And what we now had was, apart from me beginning to move some clients across, we had Chris running our crucially important joint venture, and we had Ian behind him who was picking up all of the existing clients from that new venture. Ian brought a small client base with him, but his primary role was to just start looking after some really very substantial existing client fees in order to free other people up. And Ian was really very attracted to that role. That was exactly the role he wanted to do, and he is very, very good at looking after existing clients. That then freed me up, and our main connection was running really quite well, but we'd only just brought it back into Centurion because I'd had to leave it behind at the accountancy practice where I first developed it. But I had to spend probably a year, 18 months with Chris, introducing him to all the fee earners in the firm, getting him familiar, making sure that they were all happy to start seeing him as the main point of contact on new business. I was getting involved in some quite technical personal injury work, which again was one of the things that we used to use as a marketing tool, because I can demonstrate some pretty good competence in that field. So that enabled me to go and pitch at some other personal injury lawyers. But really what I wanted to do was develop some new professional connections. We now had two that were running quite well. We wanted to go and build some more, and that was my role, was to go out and find some more. And our sort of modus operandi was twofold. We were also beginning to get some approaches from other advisors, particularly Solar accredited advisors, who really wanted to specialise in later life work. And they were sort of where they were the only Solar accredited advisor in the firm. And the firm didn't really get later life. They didn't have huge amounts of critical mass to go and attract more later life work. They perhaps weren't confident enough to go out and approach solicitors themselves directly, etc., etc. We were seen as a firm that specialised in later life advice, because out of the three of us, Stuart, Sean and I, that started, Sean and I were both Solar accredited. It was really rare at that time to have two Solar accredited advisors in the same firm. So we immediately had double critical mass compared to any other Solar advisor in the region. And that was what enabled me to start building on the Solar side of things. That attracted other Solar accredited advisors in, and my role was then presenting our growing team of Solar accredited advisors to various other private client lawyers, and particularly court of protection lawyers, and also to places like care providers. And what I'd also been freed up to do was train a couple of other people internally who came to us without Solar accreditation, trained them up and got them through the Solar accreditation.
Did you ever come across a lot of competition in that market?
No. I didn't, I suppose, because we weren't. Well, we were all on the Solar database. And I suppose what we had done by building our network of connections was we had access to other office locations. For example, I had a relationship with a small law firm in Dorchester that was quite happy for us to use their office. That put us on the Solar database in Dorchester, which was a great area. There weren't actually too many other Solar accredited advisors around. So there we were in Dorchester, and I used that as a base to sort of build through that lawyer connection a bit. But did we come across competition? No, because I suppose the modus operandi was I was aiming at specific firms of solicitors.
You've gone down a niche.
Yeah. And ultimately, I suppose after about, well, it must have been probably... Well, the starting point was Centurion. Stuart, Sean and I ran it, I suppose, for sort of 18 months. We then brought in Chris and Steve. And so the next sort of 18 months, 2 years, was really building that infrastructure with another couple of advisors. And then the last 4 years was when it really started to expand quite rapidly, bringing in other advisors. And what we sort of did there was we forged other joint ventures with other law firms, and we also created a couple of smaller offices in Cheltenham and Cardiff. And the way that we did that was we found a Solar accredited advisor in the area. We wanted an office in those areas because we had clients in those areas, and it would just be easier and better if we had a local advisor to look after them. And this is another point about collaboration, James. What we were doing here was sharing out the clients of the firm. You know, I think my understanding is that very few financial advisors would bring a new advisor in and then immediately start passing over clients to them. Well, we wanted to do that because when we wanted to build a Cheltenham office, the whole point was to bring another Stuart into Cheltenham, who was another of the Solar regional coordinators, and therefore we now had a local connection for the couple of lawyer connections that we had in Cheltenham. And it made perfect sense for me to pass over clients who were based in Cheltenham to Stuart because he was on the ground and able to deal with them a lot more cost effectively than I was able to do, because otherwise I'd have been travelling up and down from Bristol. So again, building this collaborative sort of team.
But it's all built on the right people, or with the right people, isn't it?
Yeah. And the right people, technical skills was a big part of it with us, particularly given the sort of client areas that we're working in, but also the ability and the desire to be trained up in other areas. And what we wanted were people who would come in with this collaborative relationship, you know, in mind, that you're now part of a team. We're building a firm. This is not a loose collection of individuals. We are building a firm between us. And that worked really well. And then another sort of expansionary piece we went through was that the lawyers that we were dealing with in terms of court of protection, later life and injury started asking if we were any good at divorce-related work. And of course, we could have said, yeah, we fully understand what we're doing, but we weren't going to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. So we said, well, yeah, we can help someone reconstruct their finances after a divorce, but the techie bits of actually going through a divorce process, no. But what we will do is, if you want us to build our expertise in that area, we will go and find someone who has that ability. And that was when we found Dan. And Dan, in common with a couple of other our advisors, Dan had decided that he wanted to specialise in that particular field. He didn't get the support from his existing employer. They were very short-sighted about it. They didn't see it as a business opportunity, I think, was the summary. That was because they didn't particularly work with lawyer connections like we did. So Dan had gone a certain way down the path of getting resolution accredited, and he had to do it in his own time, using his own money. So I just did a trawl around the resolution database, and I saw Dan was local, and I picked up the phone to him and I said, "How's it going?" And again, as we always did, here's our plan. You know, we're very transparent about this. This is a very collaborative firm that we're building here. This is the ultimate end game. If you come in here, it is a legitimate route to equity, and I suppose by that point we could prove that it wasn't just, that we weren't just saying that. We'd brought Steve and Chris into equity. Yeah. We'd proved that we did it. We delivered on our promises. So I started talking to Dan, and Dan said, well, yeah, I'm pretty frustrated. I'm not getting anywhere with this. And I said, well, we've got a raft of lawyer connections. Dan was doing a great job on his own, basically building his own connections, but we could really help add impetus to that because we already had lawyer connections. And and Dan was quite surprised when I said, well, we wouldn't expect you to pay for yourself to go through resolution. That will add to our firm. It's quite right that our firm pays for it. It's quite right that our firm gives you a sort of time allocation to help you get through the process. So Dan just thought, well, that's great. That's exactly where I want to be. So Dan came over.
But the thought of equity is really... it's very attractive for people to be part of something. But I guess you have to, because a lot of people, I've heard it a million times, you do all right, you get a bit of skin in the game.
Well, you're in recruitment, aren't you?
I've heard it all. I've heard it all. But ultimately, what you're saying to me is there's a plan behind it. Yes. There's this business plan. And how transparent were you with that business plan? Were you like sharing it with these incoming people, say, this is the cycle, this is where we are, and this is where the trigger points?
Yeah, 100% really. Because, we had that plan and we believed in it. And it would be a bit silly to sort of say that we've got this plan without really properly sharing it. I mean, there was nothing hidden. There's no intellectual property in there. It was just a course of action that we were all on. Why not share it with them? You could argue, perhaps, if you were being ultra cautious, we're sort of sharing in some way some form of intellectual property, but it wasn't really intellectual property. Nothing was secret. It was a very transparent firm, which was, again, why it was the most collaborative one I ever worked with.
It goes back to the trust-based relationship, doesn't it?
Absolutely. But I, like you, I've had no end of advisors, younger advisors, particularly as I've started having these chats with people over the last 6 months. Loads of people saying to me, well, I've been promised equity, but it's never happened. I'm talking to, well, not currently, but I've talked to 2 advisors in the same firm who were promised equity, who haven't had it delivered to them after 3 years, after they have met all of the expectations that they feel were sort of expected of them. And I just think it's wrong. Of course they're disillusioned, but why put people in that position? Because obviously they're just going to leave. And if they if they leave, you're sort of back to square one. You know, we had this plan building on an incremental basis. We're going, you know, as I say, the one missing link was the new business income. Now, again, it wasn't just the new business income. We didn't really look at it like that. I knew, because of the management information that we'd built with Steve, I knew what our average fee was. I knew exactly where we were getting referrals from. I knew pretty much what kind of referrals we were getting. But crucially, I knew what the average fee was. So when I had that new business target, what that really meant to me was that's the number of new clients.
That's the metric.
That's the number of new clients that we need to get to the plan this year. Everybody else is looking after the existing clients, you know, and I wasn't doing all of the business development activities. Dan particularly was building superbly on his own. But my role was to fill in any gaps. You know, well, we think we're going to get that much from this introducer next year. We're going to get this many from the solid database, you know, where all of our information was building. There was always a gap I was aiming at. And what that meant was we need to probably go and find a new introducer, perhaps, or I need to have a little bit of activity on certain areas. And that just worked really well. And then the other thing we were able to do as we built like that was we were bringing in trainee advisors underneath.
Unemployed contracts.
Absolutely.
Training you know, looking after them from the learning development perspective.
You know, because it was an intrinsic part of the plan. We needed to bring those people through in order to achieve the plan. One good thing about trainees was they were lower cost.
Where did you get them from, the trainees?
Where did we get them from? Lauren came with some background in financial advice, in admin, had a really very unfortunate experience with a firm that I knew something about, not particularly nice bunch of people at all. I won't go into details of the experience Lauren had, it's just not relevant. But Lauren came in because Lauren needed a job and had good experience in the back office of a financial advice firm. So we brought Lauren in there. Lauren came in with no formal qualifications whatsoever, but part of the deal was we will pay to put you through the diploma. So that was quite attractive. Matt was Matt came to us in quite a funny way. We actually offered Matt's mum a job. We were looking for another administrator, and Matt's mum was a friend of my wife, and as I always did when we were looking for sort of administration team members, we'd always ask around. We'd ask them, do you know anybody else who might fit in here? And we found 2 or 3 members of our admin team that way. But Matt's mum was a friend of my wife's, and she had some experience in financial services. And we interviewed Matt's mum, and during the course of that process, Matt's mum asked us about the firm and our ethos and where we were going. And she asked some seriously good questions. And the end result of that was we offered her the job. And she actually then said to me, would you mind if I turned it down? Would you offer it to my son instead?
Wow. Okay.
Matt and Matt's brother were both quite keen to get into financial advice. Matt's brother had started doing diploma exams in their uncle's firm. Well, it wasn't their uncle's firm, but it was a firm their uncle worked for. There wasn't room in that firm for Matt to go in as well. Matt had actually gone some way down the track of qualifying as a chartered accountant with one of the big firms, but really didn't enjoy it at all. And,
right.
And one of the advantages I had was that, I started as an accountant. I know what's involved in that. And so I said to Matt's mum, I'm more than happy just to have a chat with Matt. just to see if we can help apart from anything else. But yeah, seriously, if that is the right thing to do, let's have a chat with him. I'll interview him instead. And we interviewed Matt. Matt impressed us. And we offered the job to Matt.
Fair play.
Matt is doing superbly well. Matt got 100% in one of his RO exams. I've never seen it before. He took to this like a duck to water. He is now working directly with Chris. He's got through the diploma, as has Lauren. They are both moving on to the next stage. And I don't know the ins and outs of Centurion, but I do know the chaps, and I still call in and say hello from time to time. And I know both Matt and Lauren are very, very happy.
Yeah, good.
And so that's all going really well. And what we've done is we've given them a proper training path. And this wasn't a question of bringing them in, getting them through the exams and then cutting them loose. This was a question of we'll bring them in and we will take them from admin to advising over the course of probably 3 years. And they're going through the final stages of that now. They are both dealing with clients under supervision.
So it's very similar to what you went through then in terms of the qualification route, need to be qualified, and then you get that supervision in terms of the actual job you're doing with a client, and then you get effectively signed off that you are competent.
And you see, one crucial point, James, is once somebody gets their exams, they are, you haven't got competent advisor status yet, but you've done. You're halfway.
The mechanics
you've done the mechanics. You've done all the exams you need. I mean, Matt and Lauren are both going through further study now, and I am sure that at least Matt will end up, properly chartered and specialist. He is now working very closely with Chris. Chris is a sort of where I was, probably 20 years ago. Matt is where Chris was 20 years ago. Yeah. Matt will be where Chris is in 20 years. I am 100% sure Matt will be where I am or was in another 10 years or so after that. But what we had to do was keep them both interested. There is a danger, and it's very true in accountancy, that people qualify and then they go off and find new opportunities. So
because that's a risk to a small employer.
It is
to keep because you spend all this time training, mentoring, developing, and then somebody comes in with a bigger offer. Yeah,
but this again comes back to your long-term strategic plan. We weren't just training people to get them through the exams and get them to competent advisor status. We had a plan going forwards. We want both of them to stay with the firm and take on clients.
Yeah, longevity.
And, I think Lauren's soft skills are absolutely amazing. And part of that comes from Lauren's history, but superb soft skills. Matt will be far more probably on the technical side of things. Nice bloke, good skills, but he will become a rocket scientist, I'm absolutely sure. In future years, he will be a very, very competent technical advisor. He will have no problem attracting clients. Lauren probably is going to be more comfortable looking after clients. Yeah. But both of those will complement the firm long term. And the crucial point was we need to make their lives interesting so that they want to stay with the firm and grow within it. But the beauty from their situation is they can see how other people have just progressed into equity as a result of my buyout.
Do you think you can, with your secret sauce, Dave, do you think you can scale that? Because the issue that we find at the moment is there's not enough new people coming into the industry. And then it's almost like it's a cottage industry of
You've used that industry word again, haven't you?
Scrap that. We'll say profession. There's lots of young people. Leave that in. There's lots of young people coming into the profession.
Yes.
Profession.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yes.
I don't know why I said industry, actually.
I don't know why you said industry. I thought...
it's subconscious, isn't it? It's subconscious.
Well, it is for some people.
Actually, that is a point. How do you define a profession?
How do I define a profession? Well, the starting point, to me, is that a professional sells knowledge, technical competence, and experience, if you like, in applying that knowledge. Okay, that is what they are selling. They are selling what's in their head, and to some extent, James, I suppose their personality, because if you don't click with your client, you're not going to sell them anything.
Yep.
You know, and I've used that sell word, and I'm not at all embarrassed about that. I said on LinkedIn the other day, professional advisors have to sell.
You've got to.
You know, unless you're in some technical backroom role, you have to sell. So you're selling knowledge, competence, experience in applying it, and you are using that to provide your clients with solutions to either achieve their objectives or address their concerns. But crucially, you are instructed by your client. You act only for your client. Nobody else is involved. You know, you've got a fence here. Your client's on this side. So are you. The rest of the world is on the other side of the fence. So you're sitting here on the same side as your client. You act only for them. You are paid only by your client. And what you are paid for is giving advice. That's your product. There is no other product apart from advice in my book, if a professional.
But would you also advocate that the profession has also got shared ethics?
Yeah,
qualifications in terms of the other side of
it. That's part of the ethics, because one of the other things is you are acting without conflict of interest. And I said last time, it was hammered into me as a chartered accountant, you will not let any conflicts of interest arise. You will never, ever put yourself in a position, or this firm in a position, where the client's interests contradict or compete or conflict with ours. That is absolutely crucial to me. It's the keystone of professional ethics. But you've also got other things in terms of, you know, a proper code of ethics, proper ongoing supervision, a period of articles. You know, you don't become a chartered accountant overnight. You don't become a chartered accountant just by passing exams. I had to go through a properly supervised, you know, preparing a logbook to show how my knowledge was building, how I was applying it, all signed off by my principal, all that kind of stuff. Contrast that with the other side of the fence, where what you're actually doing is acting for someone other than your client. You are acting as agents of a principal, normally a product manufacturer or an investment manager. You are paid by them effectively through a share of product charges. Okay, you might be getting paid directly by your clients as well, but underneath it all, you are getting paid by your principal. Your principal is authorising you, controlling your ability to earn a living. So that gives you all these major conflicts of interest. You see, part of the problem is financial advice, actually large swathes of it encourage conflicts of interest. And that's where I have a major problem, because it was hammered into me, you will always avoid them. You will not let them arise. And if they do arise, you will disclose them and you will step out of that relationship with the client and give them another.
Do you think there's an advice gap?
Do I think there's an advice gap? I think there probably is. Not many people take financial advice. But you know, when you think about this, perhaps more people take advice than we think. You know, that they are anyone who's a member of an employer's pension scheme, no matter how that scheme is formed, will be taking some advice probably on that. It might be very limited advice, it might be very specific advice, but there is a bit of advice going on. Not many people take advice from a financial advisor in the sense that they took it from me. No, they don't. But then my argument is, does everybody actually need face-to-face human advice? I don't think they do.
Because the reason I question that, because I'm trying to get onto the point where, in my head, we need to build the profession.
Yes.
Okay, I understand what you're saying about the side of the fence, etc. But ultimately, we do need to attract new people coming in. And there is a struggle to do that if you're a small enterprise because
Yes.
you take a lot of costs. And we talk about the advice gap. Sometimes I don't think there is an advice gap. If I was to get a couple of million quid because I've just sold my business, I can make a few inquiries, I could get advice. But there is obviously people who aren't getting advice, but the point is, do they need advice? But
Yeah.
my view is, so if that is where we are now and we've got small businesses like you, how on earth do we create a profession where we attract new people into it, we give them a proper training plan, we develop them, etc., and they buy into that firm? Because you've got your big firms that are doing it, which you're not an advocate of in terms of their model, but you've also got firms like what you had, and then you've got the micro firms.
Yes.
And I'm struggling to see how do you bridge that gap?
How do you bridge that gap? Well, if we just take a step back a minute, I don't necessarily think there's an advice gap. I do think not as many people take financial advice, perhaps as they could. But what I think fundamentally, James, is that there is an even bigger trust gap. And my personal view is the trust gap is the key reason why people don't take financial advice. And by that, what I mean is I think people still do not trust financial advisors.
Really?
Yes, I do. And, and I don't think it's just me that thinks this. And I don't think I'm being overly cynical on the basis of my experience. But all the way through my sort of professional career, I had a kind of straw poll that I used to do. You know, when you're at some sort of event and you're talking to someone.
It's like a wedding.
Yeah.
Where you introduce yourself.
What's your name and
Yeah.
where are you from and what do you do? Yeah. And when it came to the what do you do bit, I could obviously answer in several ways. I could say I'm a chartered accountant. I could say I'm a trust and estate practitioner. I could say, I'm a tax advisor. I had investment advisor qualifications. I could say I'm a chartered financial planner. I could also say I'm a financial advisor. I could also say I'm an independent financial advisor. Now, what I found was that if I use one of those other answers, I'm a chartered accountant, okay, people might think, oh, God, I'm talking to the bore.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't cause fear.
Yeah.
If I said I'm a trust and estate practitioner, they, oh, what's that? I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
Sometimes chartered financial planner got that question. If I said to them, I'm a financial advisor or an independent financial advisor, you could literally see the fear welling up in some people's eyes.
What sort of demographics are we talking about age-wise?
All sorts of demographics.
I see. I challenge it because I don't know if I agree 100% on that.
Well, I can only go on my experience.
Well, I get it. I mean, when I go to a wedding, I say I work in recruitment. Oh, you're one of them.
Really? It's like being an estate agent, isn't it?
Slightly worse. Yeah, slightly worse. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's have a go at everybody while we're here.
Yeah.
Sorry, estate agents. I didn't mean that.
Yeah. We're all agents.
Well, that was my experience. I got a very different reaction to saying I was a chartered accountant to being a financial advisor. One of the key reasons I did an awful lot of the business development was that I could show the introducers I was aiming at I was a chartered accountant. I have sat in another profession for 9 years. I have dealt with financial advisors. This is not just me coming at you from the perspective of being a financial advisor. I've been on your side of the fence. I've passed clients over to financial advisors. I got a very different reaction. And I must admit, when I approached professional connections, I would bang on about those extra qualifications. You play to your strengths, don't you? But I found that was a huge strength. And I found people trusted me when I said I was a chartered accountant. And I also found that people tended to shy away when I said I was a financial advisor. And it didn't make any difference whether I stuck the word independent in front of that. Now, that I think if you and as I say, that's my experience. If you then translate that in a sort of wider context, is financial advice as attractive to a young person looking for a professional career? And let's just loosely say a professional advisor is someone who gives this technical advice in whatever field it might be to clients, and that's how they make a living. Is financial advice going to be as attractive to young people as, say, accountancy or law or surveying or whatever it may be, this other professional sector? Because there is still this, I think, sort of aftertaste, this sales connotation that almost always, I think, stems from the fact of conflicts of interest that have existed in financial advice, very definitely historically, but which we still haven't done anything about. People always think that advisor is going to be putting, well, not always. Certainly, I would agree that where clients have dealt with a proper professional advisor, they are total converts. And the other thing I found, speaking from my experience, if a client was comfortable with me and my firm, they would tell all their mates about it. Because actually finding a trustworthy financial advisor, particularly one that was very technically competent in certain areas, seemed to be a bit of a novelty. So that was one point. If you do build a reputation, your clients will naturally talk to their mates. I never actually ask my clients to refer people to me. Some people say it should be part of your process. I disagree with that. I just think if your client is convinced by you, they will tell their friends. You don't need to ask them to.
They refer.
But coming back to that, we've got to make it attractive to bring people into it. It's got to be seen as a professional career that has the same sort of.
So how do you do that then?
Well, you clear up conflicts of interest for a start, I think. We've got to get rid of this financial advisors, will put their interests before mine. There's always something in it for them. Of course there's something in it for them. Nobody gives professional advice without charging a fee for it, and I've just paid some quite considerable legal fees. Did I look twice at the fee invoice? Yes, I did. Yeah. But then I thought, well, it's worth it. I've had the advice I need. Absolutely fine. That's what I paid for. I've now got the peace of mind and I've got the bits and pieces I need to get sorted out. Was the fee the crucial thing? No, it wasn't. What I needed and what my family needed was that advice. That was a good price. If I'd felt the cost massively exceeded the benefit, of course I wouldn't have paid for the advice. That's one thing we have to get across.
But what you're saying is remove the conflict then.
Remove the conflict of interest. No other professionals are allowed to operate under conflicts of interest. No lawyer, no accountant, for example, and those are the two closest aligned professions. We are, and I say we, I'm no longer part of the financial advice profession, but financial advisors are, and large swathes of the financial advice sector still encourage conflicts of interest. I'd actually go as far as percentage-based fees. I quoted fixed fees for various reasons. As I say, one of the crucial ones, was to create this solid financial foundation for growth. I wanted to know what my recurring fee base was going to be. I wanted to know how many new clients I needed to attract. That was simple, given the fixed fee approach. But the other reason was I wanted to remove all conflicts of interest. I didn't want percentage-based fees. From a commercial perspective, it was madness to me to expose our crucial business income stream to the vagaries of markets that
fluctuations.
I couldn't even influence, let alone control. So I wanted that, but I also wanted conflicts of interest removed. And when I was an accountant, somebody would come to me for advice. I would scope out the work I was going to do to get to the advice that they needed me to give them, and I would quote them a fee. And apart from having, in the first 3 years or so of my career, to do as I was told, I then followed the path of, right, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to scope out the work. I'm going to quote you a fee. that's no conflict of interest. The client knows I'm going to get paid. What I've said is I'm going to do that. That's what I'm going to charge. Conflict removed. The client either instructs me, they think that's a fair fee, or it gives them value for money, the benefit exceeds the cost, etc. They will either instruct me or they won't.
Yeah.
If they don't instruct me, we part as friends, and very often, actually, they used to come back sometimes, but the vast majority of people used to instruct on that basis. I have no conflict. I'm not even thinking at that stage about how much money they might invest. I'm not even well, I probably know they're going to invest something, but it's irrelevant. The fee isn't going to change.
Well, let's talk about fees, because we've got about 10 minutes left anyway, and we always need a contentious, an inflammatory issue to end the podcast, Dave. So talk about fees.
Well, we go for part 3 as well.
We're going ad valorem, asset base. You've very kindly given a business plan anyway. Okay. And I've looked at it, and you've very kindly said that we can share that to our audience, to people that follow us on the company, etc. And we will do so.
Yeah,
so
unless you said that is a template for a business plan. The one that I used in Centurion, the one that I've put into a couple of
really
other financial advice
yeah.
firms. But, it's redacted, so I'm not giving away anyone's figures or anything like that, but it is a template that's available for people to follow.
I think it's a very useful tool. As you say, you need to plan for something, and I think there are a lot of people who are considering what they want to do in their next phase of their career. So we will offer that. And you also very kindly shared your fee agreement as well, which I read. And I must say, it's very clearly laid out exactly what you're going to be doing for the client. I don't understand all the complexities. The issue it's not really an issue, but the concern I would have is my charging model is completely different, because it's a value-based charging. Yours is what you're actually doing for the client, but the metric is time. Okay. Now, in your own admission, you're not an IT whiz, etc. Where I see things changing is the advancement of AI and technology to speed up and to make things more efficient in everything that we do. And if I was looking to charge a fixed fee based on a time metric, my fear would be, well, what if that 25-hour case became a 3-hour case, because it's a lot quicker? So I would have a concern then on that metric. So whilst I can see what you do, and I think it's absolutely fine now, I can see in the next 2 to 5 years things radically changing. So what's your position on that with regards to potential changes in how efficient the process could be made?
I personally wouldn't have a problem with it at all. If you look at that business plan, you'll see a tab. This business plan is a sort of integrated 10-sheet spreadsheet. One of those tabs is labelled efficiency. Okay. Now, one of the other things I always used to look at every year was our efficiency ratio. My starting point is, once I built my competence, my primary asset is my time. That's how I deliver that competence to clients, by using my time. I know, or I always used to know, how many people we had working in the firm. And I always used to know how many hours of the working year we would potentially be able to charge them out for. Everybody works, say, 47 weeks of a year. Everybody works, say, 37 hours of a week. That gives you a starting point. Now, you've got to take out some time, because, as I say, one point was we always gave the initial time away free of charge. Things like travelling time, we never used to charge for. There was always deductibles. Things like CPD, I don't think we could charge that onto clients. But the starting point was, I knew how many chargeable hours we had as a team every year. And we had 3 different tiers of charging rates. Advisors charged out at one rate, then the technical support staff charged out as a second rate, and the admin team charged out a third rate. So that put all that into a melting pot, and it gave me our total fee generating capacity. Okay, that's looking at this from one angle. The other angle was in the profit and loss accounts, I am looking for what I would believe is a reasonable operating profit of 30%. Now, my view is that there are three stakeholders in a firm. You've got the clients who it works for, the clients who pay the fees. That's your one stakeholder. The second stakeholder is the team, because this is a people business. Your team is vital. They're the ones who look after the clients. The third stakeholder is the owners. And my view was always a fair division, treating the interests of all those stakeholders equally, because if you don't treat them equally, one group of stakeholders is going to become disillusioned and fed up. And if any of your stakeholders have a problem, you have a problem. So keeping all interests balanced, I was looking for an operating profit of 30%. Before tax and accounting fiddling about. The other thing that we committed to was we would keep staff costs at around about 50%, because that was, I felt, remunerating our staff well. And as we grew, obviously, if we grow the top line, if you're keeping staff costs at 50%, that means that salaries are going up. Overheads are the easy bit. As you grow, your overheads shrink as a percentage of income. So I'm looking at all of this, and what falls out of that is the rate, the efficiency rate, and by that what I mean is the rate at which our firm is recovering its chargeable time potential. Now, any properly run, efficient professional firm should recover 85% of its chargeable time potential. Okay, that all feeds back into my business plan, and the end result is I wouldn't have a problem with tasks becoming quicker to produce. I'm not specific. Well, I am.
But would you need more clients though?
Yes,
because you're more efficient. You've got all your billing time, but ultimately that billing time you're more efficient. So your BD efforts then you need to fill the gap.
But that, in our case, and this sounds perhaps counterintuitive, because I do think the biggest problem most firms have is a lack of new clients.
Yes.
Yeah. It was never a problem for us, and that's not egotistical, and that's not, anything other than the fact, the truth. It was never a problem, because what we found, that the fixed fees were actually, I suppose, to put it in context, we charged our ongoing fees on a fixed fee basis. Most people charge on a percentage basis. It's often said that financial advisors should be 1% or whatever. Our average recurring fee ran, the last time I looked before I retired, around about 0.43.
Wow, okay.
Okay.
Interesting.
Now, we were making a profit of 30% roundabout on that fee. The overheads were running at 20%. That's the easy bit. The staff costs were running slightly over 50, but we were near enough running on that 30% profit margin. The fact that we had relatively low fees probably made it easier to attract new clients. I don't want to give the impression this was a race to the bottom on fees, because I had to run a profitable business. I had a 7-year plan in mind. I had my retirement in mind. I had an MBO in mind.
Yeah.
If I wasn't running a profitable firm, who'd want to buy into it?
Yeah.
So it had to be profitable. It had to be commercially sensible. But the fact was that if we were running more efficiently, that would reduce our fee, and I wouldn't look at this as a challenge of having to bring in new clients. What I would say is it frees up our time to look after the new clients that we're actually bringing in. Because this is also absolute fact. I don't know what the position is now, but at the point of my retirement, Centurion was receiving 60 to 70 referrals a month. Yeah. Or new client inquiries. Now, not all those came to something, but I think it was about 75% were coming from the professions. Because we'd also built one accountancy
But this stems back to having
as
a
well.
successful, profitable business with lead generation
yes, it
and
does.
professionalism.
Yes.
Because even if the market changes, where we've become more efficient, and we will do.
Yeah.
We are heading towards this at 100 miles an hour.
Well, I'm actually talking to. It's really quite interesting. I only came across this probably about a month ago, but it was an AI software provider who asked me just to have a look at something they've produced. And what they've produced is some AI-based software that makes the process of producing meeting notes, as fast as you'll ever see it.
Do you get excited about this? Do you think,
I
this
think that's great.
From a client perspective,
I've actually introduced them to Centurion because I think this is, and Steve, who is, ops, IT, infrastructure, effectively now running the place. I met with him and them, and he thought it was great, and I wanted Steve's opinion because Steve is very, very IT literate, whereas I'm not. But I can see as a business owner the massive benefit of not only being able to get your meeting notes produced within minutes. This is produced from a recording. Take your phone into a meeting, record the meeting, download it, it's done. But also, technically, what was really interesting to me was that you can use this software to set parameters. Now, our advisors, we never used a fact find. I would always kick off against an advisor using a fact find in a meeting. It's utter nonsense. A meeting should be about listening to a client.
Do you know what? I'm going to jump in there. I'm going to say absolutely 100%. Right?
Right.
If you come to me and they say, can you fill this risk questionnaire? This is where I think financial planning, you've got such an intrinsically brilliant relationship with an individual to unlock their feelings and their emotions about money and their goals, etc. But if you come in and go, if you just fill that in, please, Mr. Walker, it's a nonsense.
Yeah. I mean, our advisors were all experienced enough, and we taught our trainees, to take meeting notes. Of course we did, and actually part of their training was to take meeting notes. For example, Matt, I'm sure, is now taking Chris's. It's all part of the learning process. But the fact was that we'd have to type them out after the meeting. We'd have to sort of make sure we got all our action points right. Well, the fascinating thing to me about this software, speaking as an old fart who really doesn't get IT, is you can also use that software to set parameters. So because of the nature of the clients we dealt with, we would always be asking a client, have you got a will? What are the provisions of your will? For example, have you got powers of attorney? Now, you could use that software to actually say, we want to see a note on the client's will and whether they've got powers of attorney. So if an advisor goes through a meeting without actually asking that question and without recording the answer, the software will pick that up and will then go back to the advisor in the meeting notes. The action point is, you forgot to talk about the will and the powers of attorney, so pick it up. So not only is it a very efficient way to produce meeting notes, and it produces action points, and it really is quite amazing some of the information it does record. It will also learn, and so it will adapt to what each firm specifically requires. But it will pick up terminology. It will pick up terminology like insurance bond. It will create action points.
Yeah. And you're going to get better.
And it will get better.
Because they learn, yeah.
But speaking as a business owner and speaking with Steve and that provider in the meeting, the potential for Centurion is not that it will mean it's charging, it's dropping its fees. That's great. That will naturally result because within any scope of work, there would always be a bit of time involved. The cost of producing meeting notes was not enormous, but it's probably an hour, maybe an hour and a half of advisor time. That can now probably happen in far quicker time. But the key point is it will free that time up to be spent with one of the other 60, 70 referrals
Which are coming
through the door. So, the essence of my business plan, the thing that did fall out of my business plan, as I say, was this crucial statistic. What level of new business do we need to achieve this year? How many clients does that translate into? And where do I get those clients from? But that was the least of our problems. We never had a dearth of new inquiries coming through. And if we were ever worried about that, very simply, what I would have done would be go out and find a new introducer to deal with. Yeah. And I did that, and we built one of my last acts at Centurion was to build its one and only accounting connection, because we thought, well, before I go, we probably could do with what
the old bootlegger go out and connect. And just on fees then, because I can see how you've built that model. We are coming to the end of this podcast. I'm just looking at the guys out the window.
How long have we got on this time?
2 hours, Dave. 2 hours. We've only just touched on fees. I think if I was...
We haven't touched on the MBO yet either.
No, we haven't. Well, we'll have to do part 3, Dave. And then charge by the hour. I need to recoup my fees.
I'm paying for this privilege. I've driven myself up here.
You've just had a lucrative earn-out, young man. You've just bought a motorhome. So,
I do appreciate it. I could come up in the motorhome.
You do, yeah. It's cheaper. But I do appreciate you coming. Yeah. I think the one question, probably the final question, and then I'll sort of wrap this up and ask you something else, actually. If I was a financial advisor, I've been charging assets under management. How, in your opinion, how easy is it to transition to a fixed fee? Not the mechanics, but the pitch to the client.
I suppose my experience, I would say very easy. And crucially, James, I suppose, because for a start, I was convinced it was the right way to go. And so was Stuart. And so was everybody who came in, because it was part of our plan that we shared with everybody. This is our fee structure. It was something I think nobody had seen before, really, but everybody thought, yeah, great, once we'd explained it and why. I think where people might struggle with it is if they had a different idea of what their actual role is. My role and our firm's role was financial planner. Almost always, not inevitably, but almost always, there would be an investment involved somewhere. Now, we never presented to our clients as investment managers. We always outsourced. And latterly, we used an awful lot of passive model portfolio approach, etc. But we made it very clear our role is the plan, the strategy, to define the parameters for investment manager and, yes, to recommend an appropriate investment solution. But we had a very detailed process for explaining what our role was, what the investment was going to be, and what the parameters of that investment were, etc., etc. The clients very clearly understood we were not actually investing or managing that. Well, we were recommending, but we weren't managing those investments. Our role was planning. It was very easy, really, in that context to explain to clients, well, we are charging for our time, and what you're actually doing is paying us to perform that role. The investments will go up and down, and we always told clients the investments will go up and down. We had all sorts of charts to show them how we expected things to go up and down. They had divorced our role from this investment, if you like. So they didn't really have any qualms at all about it. I think, though, if you're the type of advisor who says to the client, I'm actually responsible for investing your money, and I'm looking at that like a hawk. And if you're sort of spinning people a line of, I can somehow influence your investment returns, then it might be quite difficult. But our clients never people say to me, well, it aligns our interests with the client, because if that investment goes down in value, so does our fee. Well, I went through 3 or 4 financial crises in my time what I would say to you is that if investments are going through a particularly sticky patch, you are likely to be spending more of your time talking to clients than less.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
And the clients don't blame me for falling investment performance. What the clients are paying me for is to ensure, really, that they can afford to tolerate any ups and downs. That's partly what they're paying for, that they can tolerate these ups and downs. And they didn't come as surprises to our clients. Because we gave them a range of expected returns. And only very rarely were those ranges ever breached. So I found it very easy, and particularly I found it easy if, as we always did, we stuck to our mantra of transparency and showed them what the fee was going to be. And because we recorded our time, we could show them what we had actually done during the year and what time we had spent. And if the client ever asked us to account for our time and said, well, you've charged me that much, nobody really, I don't think, ever challenges on this because we had a superb relationship with the clients. But sometimes, a professional attorney has got a duty to interrogate our fee. So we had to make sure that we could account for all our time and show them how the fee had been calculated. But at the end of the day, cost is a factor. But what we actually found was probably that fixed fees not only compensated us adequately and helped us towards our chargeable hour target, etc., they also resulted in considerably lower fees than some clients were used to paying. Particularly as we were using our purchasing power through these model portfolio providers to negotiate the portfolio charges, particularly as part of our strategic plan was to build our own platform to take out a tranche of third-party platform costs. What we could show to the clients was that our overall fee was really very fair and reasonable. And the other point was that what we also showed them was if investments, as are generally expected, increase over time, the client would actually keep more of that growth. And another point, and somebody made this point to me, I think it might have been this morning on LinkedIn or the day before on LinkedIn. They were sort of saying we charge a fixed fee at outset and then we charge an ongoing fee. And I think what they were getting at is it sort of aligns our interest to the client, because if investments go up, we get paid more. And if investments go down, we get paid more. What I would sort of say is just think about that in the context of accumulating and decumulating a pension fund. When a financial advisor is working with a client, I said I didn't give pension advice, and I didn't, but what I do know is when you're accumulating a pension fund, generally you don't need to take up an awful lot of time as a financial advisor. It's, yes, investments might go up and down, and yes, you've got to do an annual review, etc. But the time effort comes in when you're in decumulation phase, and the work becomes more complicated then, because what you've got to try and do is measured accumulation so the money doesn't run out, etc. Now, it doesn't make any sense at all to me as a chartered accountant, going back to that, why am I charging more money for less work at this point in time? And then I'm starting to discount my fee just as the work gets more onerous.
Complicated, yeah. So I think that's, from a fee perspective, I think that is interesting. And what we've agreed, you've kindly agreed, is we will send out your fee agreement, we'll send out your business plan, we'll distribute that. And if people want it, we'll do a live Q&A on both of those elements.
Yeah.
So people could then drill into perhaps the burning questions that they have, and they can tap into your knowledge in terms of how they would practically do things.
Yeah.
Because I think you've definitely built a successful firm. You've done an MBO. You've done things which perhaps aren't the normal path. And you talk about professionalism, and you've talked about what you've learned from being a chartered accountant. That's all good. But the practicalities of running a business, if I was looking to do it, I'd want to tap into that knowledge. So if you're happy for us to do that, we will do that, and we'll see what the impact is.
Yeah, more than happy. As I said, it'd be an excuse to drive up here in the motorhome.
I want to see it. I'm getting to the age as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Is there, before we wrap up, is there anything that you wanted to cover? I have one final question, but you did contact me, or you very kindly you tag me into these conversations, don't you?
Well, it's a sort of like an aid memoir for me, James. I think if something comes up that you might want to build into one of these conversations,
because is it finfluencers? Is that
Yes.
the term?
Yeah.
That's yeah. And I think somebody raised it today that the how the profession, use the word profession, how the profession can combat.
You're learning.
Yeah, I am learning. Yeah, slow process, Dave. I'm not chartered. Yeah, how the profession can do more to combat the rise of these, influencers is an easier word. I think that's an interesting one. I think that's quite a big debate, actually. My view on that, having two teenage children, is I think it's very difficult for financial planners to combat or even try and outdo them, because these guys, they're smart, they're on YouTube, it's algorithms, they tap into an emotion that the kids look into, and the kids are always looking for a quick win, etc. But I do think, as a starting point for the conversation, I think we should be doing more from an educational point of view at schools, teaching kids the basics on budgeting, learning to invest, the basics, because they don't have that, and my kids certainly haven't had that. So I think combating when they're already out there is quite tough, but actually you need to capture the kids when they're young.
Yes.
So they actually understand the basics. But that would be my view on that subject. I don't know what yours is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, going back to when I was a kid, my mum and dad sort of instilled in me a sensible approach to money, and yes, I had pocket money, but, I had to earn it and that kind of stuff. And I sort of tried to instill that in my kids. And my kids, I think, are all, well, the two that look after their own money are very sensible with it. I think it's absolutely vital. And I can remember my time at university where people didn't have any sense at all of budgetary control. We all went through that. We all had a great time as students, hopefully. But you've got to be sensible, and particularly these days when, people who do go through university come out with sort of debts and all that kind of stuff. It really is important. Life is tough financially when you're younger, and it's probably getting increasingly tougher.
It's harder.
Getting back to the new government, let's see if anything changes there. But it is absolutely vital. And it's not just looking after the money you've got, it's also educating people about the dangers of things like debt. I mean, I bang on about that quite a lot in certain contexts.
Credit cards as well.
Credit cards, banks give them away. My eldest has got something very similar to Down syndrome. He has been offered credit cards. Unbelievable, but it happens. It's hugely important. One of the things I do think is, and I've argued for a long time, that financial journalists should be regulated. Because certainly, I didn't really do too much commenting in the press, but I certainly responded to some of the stuff that various publications do, looking for case studies and stuff. And it horrified me. There was the one that caused me to stop doing it was, effectively, I wasn't misquoted, but they gave half the story. Well, they gave about a third of the story and then another third of the story, but they missed out the important bit in the middle, and it made me look like an absolute idiot. So I just said, well, unless I've got editorial control, I'm not doing any more of those. Yeah. But financial journalists have huge amounts of influence, and so do certain finfluencers. And it is wrong that they do. They're not regulated. It doesn't really matter what they say. They're not accountable for what they're saying. And I think they should be regulated. That's probably a lot easier to say than actually enforce. But the other thing that strikes me from that is, why do they have the influence they have? And this then probably brings me back to the trust gap. Well, if people are following finfluencers, it suggests that they trust those people. But yet we're saying there's an advice gap, and I'm saying there's a trust gap as far as financial advisors are concerned. So that just strikes me as anomalous.
But I think they're is it a trust gap there? It's sexy, Dave. That's what they're selling. They're young people. Look at this. It's crypto. It's this, and it's snipped, and it's concise.
Yes.
And we talk about long-term investing, and
Yeah, well,
you're not going to capture the imagination.
No. Well, and I think, yes, everybody wants to get rich quick, don't they?
Yeah.
And
That's
if
not new.
you're not,
That's not new.
and if you're not regulated, it's very easy to show people how to do it.
And you get property experts saying, why not buy this property and do this? It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And the matrix, the algorithm, it gets you because you will look at something and then it'll keep on pushing out this. So I think social media companies need to do more as well.
Yeah.
So I think it's a societal problem. I think it's huge, to be fair. You could debate this all day long.
Well, and it's only probably going to get worse, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
And what do we do about it? I don't really know, to be honest. I don't know.
No. Well, let's get some ideas then.
Well,
We'll put this out then.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Because I think
it is a problem.
It is a problem.
Doubt.
Yeah,
and certainly I know. What I'm told, one of my kids' friends put money into crypto. As a student, didn't end well. Well, went well for a period of time, but didn't end well. No. And it's horrific to think that the amount of money that they speculated on that is a material amount that's, they can't afford to lose.
I know. It's
So,
tough. It's a tough
wrong.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. But
well, let's see what people say then when they watch this. Final question then. Community questions, Dave. Community questions. It's only one question, actually.
Right.
If you had a magic wand, and with that magic wand, you could change one thing in the profession, what would it be?
One way or another, remove conflicts of interest.
I knew you'd say that.
And one of the things that I think is at the root of doing that is absolute clear segregation between product investment manufacture and product and investment distribution. So one of the things I would do would be I would ban product manufacturers and investment managers from operating their own sales forces, advisor sort of groups, if you like. And crucially, I suppose another thing I would do would be redefine independent financial advisor, because it infuriates me that a financial advice firm that is wholly owned by one of the major investment managers in the country can still describe itself as an independent financial advisor. And I've had a run-in with that particular, I won't name it, we'd make enough enemies. But I have named it on LinkedIn. I had a run-in with it. I met several clients. These were intelligent people, not with sort of finance and investment backgrounds, but very intelligent people who had met with that organisation and thought very clearly they were dealing with a proper independent advisor who was free of conflict of interest. And that advisor, at the end of the day, was wholly owned by a major investment manager. All of those clients had ended up in the same sort of investment strategy, all managed by that investment manager, all paying absolutely enormous charges in the scheme of things. And they, intelligent people as they were, thought they were dealing with a proper independent advisor. So that would be my big thing.
You slightly expanded it, but to two wishes there, Dave.
Well, remove all conflicts of interest, but those are the
big ones.
Those are the two ways, I think, to achieve a large part of that. Segregate manufacture from distribution, in particular ban manufacturers from owning firms, redefine independence. And the last thing I'd say, which is controversial, let's leave people with a bit of controversy, is basically ban percentage-based fees as well.
Really?
I think it just
advocate fixed fees.
I think it gives people a conflict of interest.
And what percentage of people work on that roughly, do you think, in terms of
fixed fees?
Well, no, in terms of assets. Yeah.
Invariably.
I was going to say it must be.
But just to be sensible for a minute, to put that in context, and maybe I am over cynical. it does give rise to a conflict of interest. Whether or not that conflict of interest does influence the advice that's given is a different matter, because even if that conflict of interest arises, the advisor can kind of get rid of it by not allowing it to influence their advice. But my starting point is, given I think we've got this trust gap, let's just remove the potential for that conflict of interest to arise in the first place. And the reason why I say it gives rise to a conflict of interest is, if an advisor bases their fee on the amount of money that's invested, or if their fee is driven by the risk profile of investments, or if that fee structure encourages them to discourage a client from withdrawing, that is a conflict of interest. That's what percentage-based fees do, because they affect the amount of remuneration that the advisor is going to receive. And as I say, I know some very good, very honest, very ethical percentage-based advisors, but it still creates that conflict of interest. And why let that conflict of interest arise if you're not going to let it influence your advice anyway? Just don't let it arise.
Don't do it. Yeah.
Just don't do it.
Yeah.
And again, speaking from the perspective of being a chartered accountant and an ex-business owner, I just think that getting away from percentage-based fees is one of the foundations of building a financially sound platform for future growth. So, yeah, I'll just throw that one out there as a last-minute bit of controversy. And
well, I think there's part 3. I think that could be debated. I think other people could have a conversation about that.
And I know that's a...
Because the majority do work on that.
Of course they do.
Yeah, and you're not suggesting they're not ethical.
No, I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying it is a conflict of interest.
It could be perceived as...
Well, it is a conflict of interest, but what I'm saying is, whether or not that conflict of interest actually influences the advice then depends on an individual advisor's own ethics and professional standards. I'm not saying that everybody lets that conflict influence their advice, but what I am sure of is that some people do.
But what you have done today is you've shown them another way in terms of how you did it.
Yeah.
So I think if people are looking to change, then there are some practical guidance notes that we're going to distribute.
Yeah, everyone's got a view, but I suppose all we can go on at the end of the day is our experience. And what I would say to people, and what I particularly say to any younger and newer advisor out there who's coming into this, is by anybody's standards, I had a successful career as a financial advisor over about 35 years or whatever it was, by whatever metric you measure that by. And there's more metrics than just managing or referring to the financial benefits I received at the end of the day. That I did all right, but following that sort of path did me very well, did my clients very well, enabled me to build, along with my colleagues, a very successful business, which is carrying on sustaining itself, and it is particularly well thought of by quite a number of professional connections who give it a very, very steady stream of new business.
Proof of concept.
What's not to like? Proof of concept, as you say.
Yeah.
There are probably other ways to do it, but that one I can guarantee works. So.
And I think that's a great way to end this podcast. Dave,
Right.
You've been, again, a gent. You've been very open with your thoughts. You've been a great sport. Thank you again for your time.
Pleasure.
Good to see you again. Looking very colourful in that shirt
Nice to
as
be
well.
back in Yorkshire. Well, the
It's
sun's
bloody
out,
freezing.
so-
It is the summer. It's
Well, the
freezing.
sun was out when I set off from the southwest this morning.
But thanks very much again,
Yeah.
Dave. And we'll certainly catch up, and we'll definitely do another
All
one.
right. Cheers.
Cheers, Dave.